A simple piece of clay once held the power to protect entire economies. These unassuming clay seals were the ancient world's sophisticated security technology, guarding everything from royal commands to shipments of grain across continents. By the end of this story, you will understand how civilizations from 5,000 years ago built systems of trust that rival our own. We will uncover the secret codes embedded in their designs and unravel how a broken seal could mean financial ruin or even war. What do you think it takes to build trust across a vast empire? A merchant's hands press a carved stone into a lump of damp clay, leaving behind an intricate pattern no one else can replicate. In that single, deliberate action, a contract is born. This was the dawn of authentication, a system of trust invented not in a modern office, but in the storerooms and docks of ancient Mesopotamia. These clay seals did not merely mark ownership, they actively prevented tampering. Once that clay bulla hardened around the knot of a rope or the lid of a container, anyone hoping to access the goods inside had to break the seal. A broken seal was a silent alarm, broadcasting that the contents had been disturbed. Can you envision the sheer genius of such a simple system? It required no written language for the message to be understood by a trader from a distant land. The physical state of the clay itself carried the entire story of the shipment's integrity. From basic stamps used nearly 8,000 years ago, these devices evolved into complex administrative engines. Different civilizations developed their own distinct styles: cylinder seals that rolled out continuous scenes in Mesopotamia, scarab seals in Egypt, and square stamp seals in the Indus Valley, yet they all served the same core function. They transformed a personal emblem into a tool of legal authority, creating a tangible link between an individual and their word, their goods, and their responsibilities. This fundamental innovation laid the groundwork for every secure transaction that would follow, building economies on a foundation of verifiable trust. The cool, smooth weight of a Babylonian cylinder seal fits perfectly in the palm of your hand. Running a thumb over its surface, you trace the impossibly fine lines of a carved scene, a miniature world of gods, heroes, and sacred animals. This was not merely a tool, it was a portable gallery, a personal signature rendered in stone. These seals were small, typically between 2 and 4 centimeters long, a size designed for portability and precise handling. Artisans crafted them from incredibly durable materials: hard stones like hematite or lapis lazuli, metals like copper, or carefully baked clay. The goal was to create an object that could be pressed into soft clay thousands of times without its intricate design wearing down. The two primary forms were the stamp seal and the cylinder seal. A stamp seal is what you might picture: a flat or domed surface with a carved design, often mounted on a handle. But the cylinder seal was a stroke of pure genius. Imagine a tiny rolling pin carved all around its curved surface. When rolled across a slab of damp clay, it would leave behind a continuous, repeating frieze, a story unfolding across the tablet. The key components were the seal matrix itself, which held the unique, reverse-carved image, the handle or central hole that allowed it to be held and twisted, and sometimes a short inscription naming the owner or the institution they served. The material was a direct signal of status. A common merchant might use a baked clay seal, while a royal scribe would wield one made of deep blue lapis lazuli, a stone imported from hundreds of miles away. This was security technology disguised as wearable art. Every choice, from the hardness of the stone to the depth of the engraving, was a calculated decision to prevent forgery and ensure a perfect, lasting impression every single time. The ancient artisans who made these understood that for a seal to be trusted, It first had to be a masterpiece of both art and engineering. But how did this beautiful object transform into an unbreakable lock? That lump of clay was far from ready for its vital task. It began its life as a specific type of fine, wet sediment, carefully cleaned of pebbles and grit. A scribe would knead it to the perfect consistency, a balance that felt like stiff putty. If the clay was too wet, the seal impression would blur into a muddy mess. If it was too dry, the fine details of the carved design would not capture at all. Achieving this balance was the first, crucial step in a ritual of security. Once prepared, the clay was applied directly to the point of vulnerability. For a papyrus scroll, a small lump might be pressed over the knot tying the document closed. For a wooden tablet, it could cover the tie that held the two halves together. But for a large storage jar or a sack of grain, the clay was molded around the rope, securing a lid or a drawstring, completely enveloping the knot. This placement was intentional and strategic. It physically blocked access without also destroying the seal. With the clay in place, the moment of truth arrived. The seal owner would take their personal cylinder seal, perhaps hanging from a cord around their neck, and press it firmly into the moist surface. This was not a hasty stamp. It required a steady hand and the right amount of pressure. For a cylinder seal, the scribe would roll it carefully along the clay's surface, using their fingers to guide the tiny cylinder and ensure the entire carved scene transferred onto the bulla. The goal was a single, unbroken, and perfectly clear impression. Any smudge, any skipped section could cast doubt on the seal's authenticity later. The resulting pattern, now embedded in the clay, was a miniature work of art and a unique identifier frozen in time. The final step was to let the clay harden. Some seals were simply left in the sun to dry and become brittle. For more permanent records, especially clay tablets themselves, the sealed document was baked in a low-temperature kiln, turning the clay into a ceramic that could last for millennia. Once hardened, that piece of clay became a formidable lock. To open the jar or read the scroll, a person had no choice but to break the seal. There were no second chances, no way to carefully lift it off. The system was brilliantly binary. The seal was either intact, a promise kept, or it was shattered, a silent witness to interference. For critically important contracts or royal decrees, multiple officials might press their own seals into the same clay bulla. This created a system of shared verification, where breaching the seal meant betraying the trust of not just one person, but an entire council. This meticulous physical process transformed simple earth and water into the most trusted security system the ancient world had ever known. A magnified view reveals these impressions as far more than pretty patterns. They are dense symbolic landscapes, a visual language where every animal, every deity, and every gesture was a word in a silent sentence. The choice of imagery was never accidental. A Mesopotamian seal showing a king being led by the hand by a god was not just art, it was a powerful political statement. It broadcast that the ruler's authority came directly from the divine, making any document bearing that seal an extension of sacred will. For a merchant, a seal depicting a ship being loaded with goods was a professional advertisement and a claim of expertise, instantly communicating their trade to anyone who saw the impression. These symbols formed a code that transcended written language. A farmer who could not read cuneiform could still look at a seal bearing the image of a grain deity and understand it carried the authority of the temple's agricultural administration. Cultural conventions dictated the entire visual vocabulary. Egyptian scarab seals often combined a carved beetle on top with a detailed hieroglyphic inscription on the flat base, pairing a symbol of rebirth and protection with the owner's name and titles. In contrast, the artisans of the Minoan civilization on Crete filled their seals with vibrant, swirling spirals and elegant octopuses, motifs drawn directly from their island world and their relationship with the sea. These designs were not random decorations, they were carefully curated badges of identity. The repetition of certain symbols, like the Babylonian hero Gilgamesh battling lions, created a shared cultural shorthand. Seeing that familiar scene on a clay tablet immediately signaled that the document was part of the official, heroic tradition of Mesopotamian kingship. This system allowed for remarkable efficiency. With just a glance, an official could assess the provenance, authority, and even the general purpose of a sealed object. The seal's design did the talking, building a bridge of understanding between the literate elite and the wider population. This intricate visual language transformed a simple lump of clay into a sophisticated data storage device, encoding the very identity of its owner for all to see. But what happened when someone tried to cheat the system? The journey of the seal begins not with complex myths, but with a simple line. In the Neolithic villages of nearly 8,000 years ago, the very first seals were little more than carved pebbles or bone stamps. Their designs were starkly geometric, basic cross-hatching, parallel lines, or simple spirals pressed into clay to mark a jar of stored grain or a lump of raw material. This was ownership in its most fundamental form, a visual claim saying this is mine. For millennia, this was enough. But then the world changed. Cities rose from the river valleys, and with them came sprawling bureaucracies, vast storerooms, and long-distance trade. A simple spiral could no longer convey the complex authority of a temple or the identity of a merchant traveling 1,000 miles from home. The administrative machine demanded a new kind of tool. The answer, emerging in Mesopotamia around 3,400 BCE, was nothing short of revolutionary: the cylinder seal. This was a quantum leap in security technology. Unlike a stamp that offered a single, static image, the cylinder could be rolled out to create a continuous and expansive impression. It transformed a tiny object into a portable billboard, capable of telling an entire story across the surface of a clay tablet. For the first time, a seal could combine intricate pictorial scenes with written text, weaving together art and authority into a single, unbroken band. This innovation did not happen in isolation. Different civilizations saw the same core problem and engineered their own brilliant solutions. On the island of Crete, Minoan artisans carved incredibly detailed designs into soft, colorful stones like steatite, shaping the seals themselves into unique forms like lenses or animal figures that were as beautiful as the impressions they left. In Egypt, the scarab seal became dominant. Fashioned in the shape of the sacred dung beetle, it was a stamp seal on its flat base, often inscribed with the owner's name and titles. But it was also a potent amulet, worn in life and buried with the dead to ensure protection and rebirth. Far to the east, in the Indus Valley, a completely distinct approach emerged. Their seals were predominantly square or rectangular, carved from a soft stone called steatite, which was then fired to a hard, white finish. They are famous for their elegant depictions of animals like unicorns and bulls, but most mysteriously, each one is topped with a short inscription in a script that remains completely undeciphered to this day, a silent code from a lost world. The materials themselves tell a story of escalating demands and status. As the stakes grew higher, so did the need for durability and prestige. The earliest baked clay seals gave way to far harder materials. Artisans sought out hematite, a stone so hard it could produce thousands of crisp impressions without wearing down. They prized lapis lazuli, a deep blue stone imported from distant Afghanistan, its color alone signaling immense wealth and power. Metals like copper and bronze were cast into seals, and in later periods glass was even used. Each material was a calculated choice, balancing the need for a perfect, fraud-resistant impression with the desire to display social standing. This was not a linear march of progress, but a global explosion of creativity, all aimed at solving the same essential human problem. How do you prove who you are and what you claim is true? The humble seal evolved in lockstep with civilization itself, its growing complexity a direct reflection of our own. A Phoenician merchant vessel sits low in the water, its hold packed with amphorae of olive oil and wine. Each clay jar stopper is secured by a rope, and that rope is buried within a lump of clay stamped with not one, but several distinct seals. This was the ancient equivalent of a modern shipping container covered in barcodes and customs tags, a physical chain of custody that could be understood from the Levant to the coast of Spain. Seals were the universal language of commerce, a system of verification that worked perfectly even when the merchant, the ship's captain, and the final buyer spoke entirely different tongues. A single shipment document might carry a collection of impressions, a mosaic of authority. The exporter's seal guaranteed the quality and origin of the goods. The shipping agent's mark took responsibility for the cargo's safe passage. Then came the seals of port authorities and tax collectors, each one adding a layer of official oversight. This created an auditable trail of responsibility, a story told in clay that answered every critical question. Who made this? Who is moving it? And most importantly, has the king's tax been paid? In major trading hubs like Ugarit, this process became so standardized that specialized customs seals developed. These official stamps had distinctive designs, often featuring symbols of the ruling power that acted as a clear receipt. An unbroken customs seal on an amphora was a silent shout to any inspector down the line that the import duties had already been collected, allowing goods to move swiftly through ports without repeated taxation and delays. The archaeological record brings this system vividly to life. Finds from ancient shipwrecks and port warehouses reveal a tapestry of connections. A seal impression from a Cypriot merchant found on a broken amphora handle in Egypt paints a clear picture of a trade route. The discovery of a standardized customs seal design across multiple Mediterranean sites shows a conscious effort to create a trusted, international framework. This network of seals allowed commerce to flourish on an unprecedented scale. A merchant in Carthage could purchase a shipment of textiles from a partner in Tyre, sight unseen, with absolute confidence. He knew that the unbroken seals on the cargo chests were his guarantee. They promised that the contents matched the manifest, that the quality was as agreed, and that every legitimate authority along the way had validated the transaction. This was the true genius of the system. It built trust between people who would never meet across empires that were often rivals, creating the very foundation of global commerce not with force, but with a simple, verifiable promise pressed into clay. In the heart of the Persian imperial chancery, a single seal could set armies in motion or empty a province's treasury. Royal seals were not just tools, they were concentrated symbols of power, the absolute voice of the king made physical. When a scribe pressed the royal cylinder into a damp clay tablet, he was not merely authenticating a document, he was unleashing the full authority of an empire that stretched from the Nile to the Indus River. The imagery on these seals was meticulously crafted propaganda. A common motif showed the Persian monarch in combat with a mythical beast, a powerful visual metaphor for the king's role as the defender of order against chaos. Often, a winged symbol of the supreme god, Ahura Mazda, hovered overhead, explicitly linking the ruler's decrees to divine will. This was not subtle art, It was a blunt statement. Anyone who received this sealed document was obeying not just a man, but a God's chosen representative. The empire's colossal bureaucracy ran on these impressions. A tax collector in distant Babylon would present a demand bearing the royal seal, and the local governor had no choice but to comply. A military commander on the frontier would receive his orders under the same seal, directing troop movements that shaped the fate of continents. For particularly sensitive diplomatic messages, the king might use a different, more exclusive seal, a kind of state secret embedded in clay that signaled the document's supreme importance to the few officials authorized to recognize it. The penalty for breaking a royal seal without explicit permission was typically death. This was not an overreaction, it was a necessary deterrent. In a world where a message could take months to deliver, the unbroken seal was the only guarantee that the command it carried was genuine. To tamper with it was to impersonate the king himself, a direct assault on the empire's central nervous system. To manage this power, the administration developed incredibly sophisticated protocols. The royal seal itself was not kept by the king, but by a highly trusted official, the seal keeper. This individual guarded the physical seal as if it were the king's own signet ring, which it often was. Access was strictly controlled, and a detailed log was maintained, recording every single time the seal was used, the document it authenticated, and the official who authorized its application. This created a built-in audit trail, a way to track and verify the seal's own usage. This elaborate system reveals a stunning truth. These ancient governments built a form of secure, remote administration that rivaled modern systems. Without telephones or the internet, they used a piece of carved stone and some clay to project their authority across thousands of miles, maintaining control through a universally understood language of trust and terror, all encapsulated in a single, unbroken impression. A broken seal in a Babylonian courtroom was more than a damaged piece of clay. It was a broken promise that could unravel an entire case. Inside the chambers of a judge, the most compelling evidence was not a spoken testimony but a clay tablet, its surface crowded with the seal impressions of every person bound by the agreement. These were the legally binding signatures of the ancient world, the mechanism that transformed a simple conversation into an enforceable contract. A marriage agreement, a sale of property, or the terms of a business partnership only became official once the involved parties and their witnesses pressed their personal seals into the document's damp surface. This act permanently recorded their consent, freezing their commitment in ceramic. The layout of these seals on the tablet was itself a language of legal hierarchy. The primary parties to the contract, the buyer and seller or the bride and groom, would place their seals prominently at the top or over the key clauses. Witnesses, often respected members of the community, would then add their own marks in a careful ring around the edges of the tablet. This spatial arrangement created a clear visual map of responsibility, instantly showing the judge who was directly involved and who had observed the agreement. Court records recovered from this era show judges meticulously comparing suspicious seal impressions on a disputed contract to the authentic seals of the individuals involved. If the design did not match perfectly, or if the seal was found to be cracked or tampered with, the entire agreement could be declared null and void. The physical integrity of that clay bulla was synonymous with the integrity of the contract itself. This system established a powerful legal framework built on verifiable evidence. It removed the ambiguity of a simple handshake or a whispered deal, creating a permanent, physical artifact that could be presented to authorities years or even decades later. A seal was not merely a security device. It was the very foundation of justice in commercial and personal life. a tool that allowed complex societies to function by making a person's word as solid and lasting as fired clay. That microscopic flaw you just passed over was no accident. It was a deliberate security feature, an intentional imperfection carved into the seal's design that served as a hidden key. Ancient artisans and the authorities who employed them were locked in a constant, high-stakes technological duel with counterfeiters. The integrity of an entire empire's economy and legal system depended on winning this battle. To protect their seals from forgery, they developed a suite of anti-counterfeiting measures that feel remarkably modern. One of the most ingenious techniques was the inclusion of these tiny, unique flaws. A master carver might deliberately nick the wing of a carved deity or slightly misalign a single line in a geometric border. These minuscule errors were not recorded anywhere. They were simply memorized by a small group of trusted officials. When a questionable seal impression was presented, they would examine it for that specific, known imperfection. If the forgery was too perfect, it was instantly revealed as a fake. This was the ancient equivalent of a microprint security thread on a modern banknote, a detail invisible to the naked eye but verifiable under close scrutiny. Beyond these hidden markers, the sheer artistic complexity of the seals themselves was a formidable defense. A cylinder seal depicting a detailed scene of a royal hunt, with individual feathers on the horses and intricate patterns on the hunter's clothing, was a nightmare to replicate accurately. A forger would need to be a master engraver in their own right, with access to the same rare stones and tools. The choice of material was a crucial part of this security strategy. Hard stones like hematite and lapis lazuli were incredibly difficult to carve without specialized, high-quality drills and abrasives. These materials were also controlled, often imported through royal monopolies. A forger trying to work with a softer, more common stone would produce a seal that felt and looked wrong, and its impressions would wear down quickly, betraying its illegitimacy. But technology alone was not enough. The administrative system backed it up with rigorous verification protocols. Centralized registries, essentially libraries of clay tablets bearing the official impressions of every important seal in the kingdom, were maintained. If a tax document arrived with a suspicious seal, a scribe could pull the registry tablet and compare the two impressions side by side, looking for discrepancies in the depth of the lines or the spacing of the elements. For the most critical transactions, the system required multiple layers of approval. A royal decree allocating funds for a new temple might need the seals of the king, the head priest, and the treasury official, all pressed onto the same clay bulla. To forge such a document, a criminal would need to perfectly replicate not one, but 3 distinct, highly complex seals, a virtually impossible task. This relentless arms race between security and fraud drove constant innovation for thousands of years. Each new forgery technique prompted a more sophisticated response from seal makers and administrators, refining a system of trust that protected everything from a farmer's grain loan to the movement of imperial armies. The very existence of these elaborate countermeasures proves a simple, enduring truth. Where there is value, there will be attempts to steal it, and where there is trust, there must be brilliant ways to defend it. The weight of a royal seal was far more than a measure of stone or metal. It was the weight of an empire, and the person who carried it held a position of almost unimaginable trust. This was the seal keeper, the human firewall protecting the entire system from corruption and fraud. In the cool, shadowed halls of an Egyptian temple or the bustling scriptorium of a Mesopotamian palace, this individual stood as the gatekeeper of official truth. Their duty was not simply to lock a seal away in a chest, but to guard the very integrity of the institution it represented. To become a seal keeper was to enter an elite class, often drawn from noble families or the priestly caste, and their training was a rigorous apprenticeship in the sacred art of authentication. They learned the precise pressure needed for a perfect impression, the exact consistency of the clay, and the solemn rituals that surrounded the act of sealing. Every application of the seal was a monumental event recorded for posterity. The keeper maintained meticulous logs noting the date, the document, the official authorizing the seal, and the purpose of its use. This created an unbreakable chain of accountability, a permanent record that could be consulted if any question of legitimacy arose later. Their responsibilities were a masterclass in ancient security protocol. The physical seals were stored in a secure location, often a locked box within a guarded room, accessible only to the keeper and their most senior assistants. Before any sealing could occur, the keeper had to verify the identity and authority of the official requesting its use. Was this person truly empowered to issue such a decree or contract? Was the document's content appropriate for the level of authority the seal would grant it? The keeper acted as a final check against error and ambition. They also performed regular inspections of the seals themselves, checking for any signs of where that might blur future impressions, or worse, for any evidence of tampering or attempted duplication. In royal courts, the seal keeper's role frequently expanded into high-level administration. By controlling the flow of sealed documents, they effectively managed the heartbeat of government. They coordinated the activities of different departments, ensured that tax collectors' demands were properly authorized, and verified that military orders bore the correct, unbroken impressions before they were sent to the frontiers. This concentration of trust meant the position could become a hereditary one, passed from father to son. The specialized knowledge of security protocols, the subtle recognition of a genuine seal's feel and sound, and the unspoken understanding of political nuance became a family legacy. This generational continuity provided stability, ensuring that the empire's most crucial security technology was always in the hands of those trained from birth to understand its profound significance. The existence of the seal keeper proves that the ancients understood a fundamental principle we still rely on today. The most sophisticated security system in the world is only as strong as the people entrusted to manage it. The true power of these seals is not locked in museum cases, but lies shattered on the floors of ancient storerooms. In the dust of a forgotten administrative building, an archaeologist's brush reveals not a whole seal, but a broken piece of clay bearing the ghost of an impression. These fragments, these broken promises, are the real treasure. Sites like the Royal Archives of Ebla in Syria present a staggering sight. Room after room filled with thousands of these clay ceilings, all preserved when the building burned, accidentally baking and saving them for millennia. Each piece is a frozen moment in a long collapsed bureaucracy. A simple receipt for a delivery of wool, a complex treaty between city-states, a tax record from a remote farm, all authenticated with a press of clay. The sheer volume is what tells the real story. It reveals a system that was not reserved for kings and epic decrees, but one that permeated every level of society, from the royal court down to the local grain inspector. By meticulously cataloging these finds, researchers can trace the life of a single seal. They can see how its impressions slowly change over time, the fine lines becoming slightly shallower with each use. This wear pattern acts as a clock, helping to date documents and understand how actively a particular official or merchant was working. The geographic spread of a single seal's impressions paints a map of influence and connection. Finding the same official's seal on fragments in a capital city, a distant garrison, and a port town vividly illustrates the reach of that administration's network, charting the flow of goods and commands across an empire. Modern technology has transformed these humble clay lumps into vast digital libraries. Using high-resolution 3D scanning, researchers can now create perfect virtual models of a seal impression. They can manipulate the light to highlight details invisible to the naked eye, studying the microscopic striations left by an artisan's tool 4,000 years ago. This can reveal if a seal was recarved or identify the unique style of a specific workshop. It allows scholars to compare impressions found continents apart with pinpoint accuracy, confirming trade links that were once only theoretical. These technological advances are letting us read these ancient security devices in a whole new way, uncovering the subtle fingerprints of the individuals who made and used them. These broken pieces of clay are far from the end of the story. They are the key that unlocks a deeper understanding of how these complex systems of trust truly operated in the rhythms of daily life. The hands that carved these seals were masters of both art and physics. In the quiet of a specialized workshop, an artisan would begin not with a chisel, but with a careful selection. The raw stone was everything. Steatite was a popular choice, soft enough to be carved relatively easily with simple copper tools, yet it could be fired in a kiln to a hard, durable finish. For the most demanding clients, the artisan reached for hematite. This iron oxide crystal was brutally hard, resisting the carving tools at every turn, but it rewarded that struggle with an unparalleled ability to hold the finest lines, producing thousands of crisp, sharp impressions without wearing down. And then there was lapis lazuli, a stone imported from mountains hundreds of miles away. Its deep, celestial blue color was a statement of wealth and divine connection before a single mark was even carved into it. The choice of material was a direct reflection of the seal's intended purpose and the status of its future owner. With the stone selected, the true craftsmanship began. The primary tool was the bow drill. The artisan would press a copper or bronze tip against the stone, then spin it rapidly by sawing a bow back and forth. This was not a process of brute force, but of immense patience and control. A slip of the hand, a moment of too much pressure, and weeks of work could be ruined. Dust and fine abrasive sand, often made from crushed quartz, were used to slowly grind away the stone, transforming a blank cylinder or stamp into a reverse image masterpiece. The most complex cylinder seals, with their intricate scenes of mythology and power, could take many months to complete. This was not mass production. It was bespoke security, each seal a unique product of immense skill. Over centuries, the tools evolved. The introduction of harder bronze alloys and later iron tips allowed artisans to achieve even finer details, carving deeper and more complex designs into the toughest stones. This technological arms race was driven by the need to stay ahead of forgers. A seal carved with new, finer tools was instantly more difficult to counterfeit than an older, cruder model. The manufacturing traditions themselves became cultural signatures. In Mesopotamian workshops, artisans perfected the art of the cylinder, using the bow drill to create flowing, continuous narratives that rolled out like a tiny tapestry. In Egypt, the focus was on the scarab, carving the beetle's form on top, and then meticulously inscribing the flat base with hieroglyphs, often using a combination of drilling and precise hand graving. The sophistication of these workshops and the months of labor invested in a single small object speaks volumes. Ancient societies placed an extraordinary value on the integrity of their security devices, investing their best materials and their most skilled artists to create objects of trust that were as beautiful as they were unbreakable. A master carver in Mesopotamia would never mistake their work for that of an artisan in Egypt. The unique administrative spirit of each civilization was literally carved into their seals, creating a world of regional dialects in the language of trust. In Mesopotamia, the cylinder seal reigned supreme, its continuous surface a perfect canvas for epic narratives. Rolling one across a clay tablet did more than authenticate. It broadcast a miniature ideology, a story of divine favor and royal power that reinforced the very structure of their society with every impression. Far to the west, Egyptian bureaucracy took a different path. Their iconic scarab seals were stamps, not rollers, carved in the shape of the sacred dung beetle, a symbol of rebirth and the sun's journey. These objects fused the practical with the profoundly spiritual. The flat base was typically inscribed not with a scene, but with the owner's name and titles in crisp hieroglyphs, making the seal a direct extension of an individual's official identity, an identity they believed would be validated in the afterlife. This was personal authentication wrapped in a protective amulet. Meanwhile, in the sophisticated cities of the Indus Valley, a more enigmatic system emerged. Their seals were predominantly square, carved from steatite and fired to a porcelain-like hardness. They are famous for their serene, powerful animal motifs, most commonly a mysterious single-horned creature often called a unicorn. But the real puzzle lies above the animal, a short inscription in the still undeciphered Indus Valley script. The consistent use of these symbols, rather than personalized images or names, suggests their seals may have represented offices, workshops, or merchant guilds instead of individuals, pointing to a highly centralized and possibly collective form of economic control. Across the Mediterranean, the Minoans of Crete developed a style as fluid as the sea that surrounded them. Their seals, often carved from colorful, soft stones like amethyst or serpentine, were shaped into unique forms, everything from lenses and amygdaloids to animals and human figures. The designs etched into them were a vibrant reflection of their world, swirling abstract patterns, elegant octopuses, and leaping dolphins. These were not tools for vast imperial record-keeping, but for managing the complex, maritime-based economy of a palace-centric society, their beauty itself a mark of elite status and cultural sophistication. And in China, a sealing tradition evolved in remarkable isolation. While other cultures used stone, Chinese artisans of the Shang and Zhou dynasties primarily cast their seals from bronze. These were almost exclusively stamp seals, and their defining feature was the inscription of characters, often the name of an individual or a government office. This focus on the written word over pictorial symbolism established a pattern that would continue unbroken for thousands of years, directly linking the ancient seals of bronze to the carved name chops still used across East Asia today. Each of these distinct styles was a perfect adaptation, a cultural solution to the universal human need for trust, proving that the same fundamental technology could be molded to fit the unique soul of every civilization that wielded it. A royal seal carved from deep blue lapis lazuli was never merely an object. It was a sentence spoken in a silent language of power. Every aspect of its existence, from the stone it was made from to the scene it depicted, communicated a specific message to anyone who saw its impression. This was a specialized vocabulary where material, imagery, and application came together to form a complete statement about authority, status, and function. In this sophisticated language, a grand, intricately carved cylinder seal of imported stone shouted the prestige of a king or a high priest, while a modest, locally made stamp seal of baked clay quietly stated the identity of a merchant. The material itself was the first and loudest word in this conversation. A common trader could never afford or be permitted to use a seal of lapis lazuli, a stone that had to travel thousands of miles from its source in Afghanistan. That material was reserved for the pinnacle of society, its celestial blue color associating the ruler directly with the gods. The size and complexity of the carving followed the same rules. A royal seal was a masterpiece of miniature art, dense with figures and symbols, requiring months of labor from a master artisan. A farmer's seal might be a simple geometric pattern, quickly carved and purely practical. The imagery was never a matter of personal choice, but followed strict, unwritten codes. A king was almost always shown in a handful of approved poses, locked in combat with a mythical beast to symbolize his role as defender of order, or receiving his authority directly from a deity. A priest's seal would prominently feature the symbols of his specific temple and god, a bull for the storm god or a star for the goddess of love, instantly communicating his office and divine affiliation. This visual shorthand allowed a literate official to understand the provenance and gravity of a document at a single glance. The system grew even more precise within large administrations. A single government bureau might employ a suite of different seals, each with a distinct design for a specific function. One seal, bearing the image of a grain sheaf and a measuring vessel, was used exclusively for tax collection on agricultural products. Another, depicting a soldier and weapons, authenticated military orders and troop movements. A third, showing a ship and a stylized wave, was reserved for customs documents at the port. This functional specialization prevented a corrupt official from using the tax seal to issue a fraudulent military command, creating built-in checks and balances. Even the physical application of the seal on a clay tablet carried nuanced meaning. The order in which multiple seals were pressed into a document often reflected a clear hierarchy of approval. A primary authority, perhaps the king or governor, would place their seal at the top or over the opening lines. Secondary officials and witnesses would then add their marks around the edges or on the reverse. A document with seals clustered in a specific spatial pattern told a story of shared responsibility and collective verification. To understand this complex language is to gain a master key to these ancient worlds. By reading the seals, we can reconstruct the entire bureaucratic skeleton of a civilization, seeing not just who held power, but how that power was structured, delegated, and communicated across vast distances. We can distinguish a routine tax receipt from an urgent military dispatch, or a private contract from a royal proclamation, all from the silent story told by a piece of impressed clay. That simple, unbroken seal on a market vendor's jar of oil was a promise you could hold in your hand. For the average person living 4,000 years ago, these clay impressions were not just for kings and tax collectors. They were part of the daily fabric of life, as common and essential as the coins in our pockets today. You would encounter them from the moment you entered the marketplace. A potter selling his wares would have his personal stamp pressed into the wet clay of an amphora before it was fired, his mark guaranteeing the quality and capacity of the vessel. When you bought a measure of grain, the merchant might seal the sack with a lump of clay bearing his seal, your receipt that the amount was correct and untampered with. This was security and branding rolled into one, a system that allowed even small-scale artisans and farmers to build a reputation for reliability. Back at home, the head of a household would use a simple seal to mark their property. Storage jars of preserved fish, barrels of beer, and even wooden chests containing family heirlooms would be secured with a clay bulla. This was not just about preventing theft, it was about establishing order and ownership within a crowded household. When a marriage contract was drawn up or a piece of family land was sold, the involved parties and their witnesses would press their personal seals onto the clay tablet. For an ordinary farmer, this act transformed a verbal agreement into a legally binding document, giving them a voice and protection within the community's legal framework. The accessibility of this technology is what made it so revolutionary. While a governor flaunted a cylinder of imported lapis lazuli, a farmer could own a perfectly functional seal made from cheap, locally sourced stone or even baked clay. These personal seals were often simple in design, perhaps just a few crossed lines or a basic geometric pattern, but they were no less legally valid. The material and complexity were a direct reflection of economic status, yet the function remained the same: to authenticate an individual's will. Even slaves, who were considered property themselves, sometimes possessed rudimentary seals. They might use them to mark their personal storage pots or to make an impression on work documents, a small but significant acknowledgement of their limited legal personhood and their capacity to manage minor goods. This pervasiveness reveals the true depth of the system. Seals were not a top-down imposition, but a cultural tool that society willingly adopted at every level. They provided a universally understood method for building trust between neighbors, for enforcing fair trade, and for giving even the most common citizen a tangible form of identity in a world without identity cards. The technology was so deeply integrated that life without it would have been almost unthinkable, creating a civilization where a person's word was not just heard, but physically sealed for all to see. A modern laboratory holds a light far brighter than the ancient sun that once hardened these clay seals. Researchers now use a technique called reflectance transformation imaging, where multiple photographs are taken of a single seal impression, each with light projected from a different angle. These images are then combined by a computer to create a dynamic digital model. On a screen, a scholar can manipulate this virtual light source, sliding it across the impression's surface. What appears as a smooth, worn patch to the naked eye suddenly springs to life, revealing the crisp, sharp lines of a carved lion or the delicate curve of a hieroglyph that had been invisible for centuries. This is the science of sigillography in action, a field that has transformed from simple cataloging into a sophisticated detective agency for the ancient world. It combines the eye of an art historian with the tools of a materials scientist and the data-crunching power of a digital archaeologist. Beyond seeing the unseen, residue analysis adds another layer of evidence. Scientists can take a tiny sample from the clay of a ceiling and analyze its chemical signature. Sometimes they find microscopic traces of the very substance it was meant to protect, identifying the ghost of ancient wine, oil, or grain that left its mark on the clay 4,000 years ago. But the real revolution is happening in vast digital libraries. Database technology now allows a researcher in London to instantly compare a seal impression from a dig in Turkey with thousands of others in collections from Berlin to Baghdad. An algorithm can scan through these thousands of images, identifying a match for a seal that was used by a specific merchant whose impressions are found on tablets in 3 different cities. This reveals his trade route with a precision that was once impossible. Statistical analysis then takes over, mapping the distribution of these seals. By tracking which official seals appear in which cities, and in what order of hierarchy on documents, researchers can reconstruct the entire administrative skeleton of a fallen empire. They can see how a taxation system spread out from a capital city, or how a particular style of seal and the bureaucracy it represented was adopted by a conquered territory. This scientific approach turns a broken piece of clay into a key for unlocking entire systems of control and commerce, showing us not just what these objects were, but how they actively built and maintained the complex world of the past. These miniature clay artifacts are more than just ancient locks. They are densely packed historical archives. While grand monuments and royal inscriptions tell the stories of kings and conquests, seals preserve the quiet, everyday realities of the ancient world, capturing moments that were rarely considered worthy of epic poetry. A single seal impression found on a broken pottery shard in a merchant's house can tell us that individual's name, their profession, and even hint at their personal faith through the symbols they chose. This is a glimpse into a life that would otherwise be completely lost to history, a personal signature from someone who lived and worked 4,000 years ago. The evolution of seal designs acts as a precise clock for archaeologists. When excavating a layered city, finding a distinct style of seal, perhaps one with a particular way of depicting a god or a specific border pattern, in a certain stratum helps date that entire layer and everything found within it. This is especially crucial in places where written records are sparse or where carbon dating is inconclusive. Seals become the chronological anchors that allow us to build accurate timelines for civilizations whose own histories have faded. Perhaps most remarkably, seals often fill critical gaps in our knowledge of ancient governments. A seal inscription bearing the name and title of a high official previously unknown from any royal chronicle suddenly adds a new character to the historical stage. We learn that a queen named Ku-Baba ruled in the city of Kish not from a long epic, but from her own seal impressions found on administrative tablets. These artifacts help us reconstruct entire family trees of bureaucrats and trace lines of succession that were omitted from the official, polished narratives. The geographic journey of a single seal's impressions paints a vivid map of ancient connections. Finding the same merchant's personal stamp on clay fragments in a Mesopotamian city, a port in Bahrain, and a distribution center in the Indus Valley does more than just trace a trade route. It maps a network of deep, trusted commercial relationships that spanned continents. Even the broken seals themselves tell a powerful story. Archaeologists frequently find caches of seals that were deliberately shattered or defaced. This was not random vandalism, it was a formal act of decommissioning. When a scribe died, retired, or fell from favor, his seal was often ritually broken to prevent its misuse and to nullify any document it might later authenticate. This careful destruction reveals a sophisticated understanding of security and the life cycle of administrative power. From the grand sweep of international trade to the intimate details of a single official's career, these unassuming pieces of clay offer us a multi-layered window into the past, preserving the fingerprints of history in the most literal sense. The relentless pursuit of security drove a technological arms race that spanned centuries. Ancient artisans were not merely craftsmen, they were engineers of trust, constantly refining their designs to stay one step ahead of forgers. The most significant leap was the evolution from the simple stamp seal to the complex cylinder seal. A stamp offered a single, static image that was relatively easy to copy. But a cylinder seal, when rolled across damp clay, produced a continuous, sprawling frieze. To perfectly replicate such a long, intricate scene, with its interconnected figures and backgrounds, was a monumental challenge for any would-be counterfeiter. This innovation alone dramatically increased the security of important documents and shipments. To make forgery even more difficult, seal makers began creating composite seals. These ingenious devices combined multiple, distinct design elements into a single matrix. Imagine a seal that had a central emblem of a lion, surrounded by a border of intricate guilloche patterns, and a short inscription running along the edge. A forger would now have to perfectly replicate not one, but 3 separate artistic styles and techniques on a tiny surface. Any mistake in the spacing of the spiral border or the form of a single cuneiform sign would reveal the seal as a fraud. This was the ancient equivalent of adding holograms and micro-printing to a modern banknote, layering security features to overwhelm counterfeiters. Some civilizations pushed the boundaries even further with mechanical seals. These were marvels of miniaturization, incorporating moving parts or unique application methods. There is evidence of seals with rotating rings or pivoting elements that could alter the final impression. Others were designed to be applied with a rocking or twisting motion, creating a distinctive, layered image that was impossible to achieve with a simple straight roll or stamp. The resulting impression had a unique texture or depth that served as a built-in authenticator, a signature characteristic known only to the officials who used it. The materials themselves underwent a revolution. While stone was effective, the introduction of metal seals, first in bronze and later in silver and gold, was a game-changer. Casting a seal from molten metal allowed for incredible precision, capturing finer details than could ever be carved by hand into even the hardest stone. Bronze was tough and resistant to wear, capable of producing thousands of identical, sharp impressions. Precious metal seals, reserved for the highest levels of power, were not just symbols of status. Their very material composition made them exponentially more difficult to obtain and duplicate, adding a physical barrier to counterfeiting. This technological progress was matched by administrative specialization. Bureaucracies developed an entire toolkit of seals for different tasks. For daily personal use, the seal ring became popular, a small stamp set into a metal band worn on the finger, always ready to authenticate a quick letter or a minor purchase. At the other extreme, large ceremonial seals, sometimes too heavy to be used by hand, were created for state proclamations, their immense size and complexity communicating unshakable authority. And for the smooth flow of commerce, standardized customs seals were manufactured in bulk, their identical designs making them instantly recognizable to inspectors in every port, streamlining trade across vast empires. This relentless innovation proves that the defense of trust was always evolving, a silent war waged with artistry, metal, and brilliant ingenuity. A masterfully carved seal was more than a tool, it was a psychological anchor. These small clay impressions worked because they tapped directly into the deepest parts of the human mind, transforming the abstract concept of a promise into something you could literally hold in your hand. The very act of pressing a seal into damp clay created a powerful, tangible representation of commitment. An agreement was no longer just words spoken into the air, it was now a physical object, a miniature monument to the deal that had been struck. This transformation from an idea to an artifact made the promise feel more real, more permanent, and far more difficult to break. Once that clay hardened, the agreement itself seemed to solidify with it. The system brilliantly leveraged our innate need for visual and tactile confirmation. A broken seal was not just a technical failure, it was a visceral, intuitive signal of betrayal. Anyone, regardless of their language or literacy, could immediately understand the story it told. The jagged edges and fractured pattern screamed interference, triggering a primal instinct of caution and distrust. There was no need for a written warning or a complex explanation. The physical evidence was undeniable and universally understood. This immediate, non-verbal communication was the system's greatest psychological strength. The symbols carved into the seals themselves were carefully chosen to trigger cultural associations with authority and reliability. For a farmer in ancient Egypt, the scarab beetle on a tax collector's seal was not just a picture, it was a symbol of divine order and cyclical renewal, lending an air of sacred inevitability to the obligation. In Mesopotamia, seeing the image of the king standing with a god on a royal decree connected the document to a cosmic hierarchy that was difficult to challenge. These familiar icons bypassed logical scrutiny and spoke directly to the subconscious, making the seal's authority feel natural and justified. The entire process was wrapped in a powerful ritual that reinforced the gravity of the moment. The careful preparation of the clay, the deliberate ceremonial pressing of the seal, and the public witnessing of the act all combined to create a sense of occasion. This was not a casual handshake. It was a performative event designed to impress upon everyone involved the serious, binding nature of the agreement. The ritual separated this promise from the countless other interactions of daily life, elevating it to a matter of communal and legal significance. Ancient administrators, without ever studying psychology, intuitively built systems that worked with human nature. They understood that for security to be effective, it had to be both technically sound and psychologically persuasive. It had to feel secure. By making trust visible, tangible, and ritualized, they created a system that felt as solid as the clay it was made from. This profound understanding of the human psyche is the hidden reason why these simple seals could command respect and maintain order for thousands of years, binding strangers together in networks of commerce and law that shaped the ancient world. The barrier between the king's treasury and the god's storehouse was thinner than you might think. In the dim, incense-heavy air of a Sumerian temple, a priest would press a special cylinder seal into the clay bulla, securing a jar of sacrificial oil. This was no ordinary administrative act. The seal itself was carved with the image of the temple's deity, and its use was a sacred ritual. The priests believed the divine symbols did more than just prevent tampering. They actively sanctified the offering, ensuring its essence reached the divine realm unspoiled by mortal interference. A broken seal here was more than a breach of security. It was a sacrilege, a sign that the offering had been defiled and the gods might reject it. This spiritual dimension transformed the entire concept of protection. A seal depicting a powerful god like Enlil or Inanna was not merely a mark of ownership. It was a conduit of divine power, a supernatural shield believed to guard the sealed objects from both physical thieves and malevolent spirits. Temple administrations managed vast estates of land, livestock, and precious materials, all dedicated to the gods, and they used a suite of distinctive seals to oversee this sanctified property. A clay tag bearing the seal of the temple of Shamash, the sun god, on a sack of temple grain carried a dual message for the human laborers. It was an official record, and for the faithful, it was a declaration that this grain belonged to the divine and was under his watchful eye. This fusion extended powerfully into death. In ancient Egypt, the sealing of a tomb was a profound ritual. The necropolis priests would use official seals, often bearing the jackal god Anubis, to secure the burial chamber's doorway after the mummy was laid to rest. The impression in the plaster was a final, powerful spell, meant to protect the deceased on their journey to the afterlife and to act as a supernatural deterrent against any living soul who dared to break in. To disturb such a seal was to risk divine wrath and eternal curse. The same physical object, a personal scarab seal, could be used by its owner during their life to authorize a business deal and then be placed in their tomb to serve as a protective amulet for their soul. This seamless integration reveals a world where security was holistic. Protecting a shipment of grain meant ensuring its physical quantity and its spiritual purity. Securing a tomb meant both preventing grave robbers and safeguarding an eternal journey. The clay seal, in its beautiful simplicity, was the perfect tool for this dual purpose, a lock that worked in two worlds at once, defending against human deceit and supernatural danger with equal resolve. That unbroken clay seal from 4,000 years ago shares a direct lineage with the security protocols protecting your digital identity today. The fundamental principles these ancient administrators perfected have never truly disappeared. They have simply been translated into new technologies. The core idea of using a unique, difficult-to-replicate mark to verify identity is the very foundation of your handwritten signature on a contract, the biometric scan of your fingerprint to unlock a phone, and the complex cryptographic key that secures an online transaction. Each is a modern iteration of that personal cylinder seal, a unique identifier that says, "This is me, and I authorize this action." The ancient practice of creating an auditable trail finds a powerful echo in contemporary systems like blockchain. When multiple officials pressed their seals in sequence on a clay tablet, they were creating an immutable record of approval, a chain of custody frozen in ceramic. Today, blockchain technology performs a remarkably similar function in the digital realm, creating a decentralized and tamper-evident ledger where each transaction is cryptographically linked to the one before it, forming a permanent, verifiable history that is as difficult to alter as a fired clay document. The ancient need to prove a document existed at a specific moment is met by our modern digital timestamping services, which serve the same purpose as a dated seal impression in a royal archive. Look closely at a modern banknote or passport, and you will see the direct descendants of those deliberate flaws and intricate carvings. The holograms that shift and change when you tilt the bill, the microprinting too small to be photocopied, and the complex guillotch patterns are all engineered to be incredibly difficult to replicate perfectly, just like the miniature scenes on a hematite cylinder seal. The ancient arms race between seal makers and forgers continues today between governments and counterfeiters, fought with advanced optics and specialized inks instead of bow drills and hard stones. Even the human structures built around these technologies persist. The role of the ancient seal keeper, the trusted guardian of the royal seal, is mirrored in the modern notary public who verifies identities and applies their official stamp to documents. Corporate sealing practices, where a company's official seal is kept under strict protocols and used to authorize major agreements, are a direct institutional inheritance from those Mesopotamian administrative houses. We still rely on designated authorities and verification procedures to manage our most important instruments of trust. Recognizing this deep technological lineage reveals a profound truth. While our tools have evolved from carved stone to encrypted code, the essential human challenges remain unchanged. How do we prove who we are? How do we make a promise binding across time and distance? How do we build systems that are resilient to deception? The answers first emerged not in Silicon Valleys, but in river valleys, where the pressing need to secure a shipment of grain led to an innovation that would shape the very architecture of trust for millennia to come. An unopened jar from a pharaoh's tomb still bears its unbroken seal, a silent sentinel guarding a secret for over 3,000 years. What priceless substance, what sacred offering does it contain? The choice for archaeologists is agonizing: to break the seal and finally know, or to honor the ancient intention and leave the mystery intact. This is just one of the enduring puzzles that surround these artifacts. Even with our advanced technology, we cannot fully decipher the language of the symbols themselves. On Minoan seals, why do octopuses and elaborate spirals appear with such frequency? Were they mere decoration, or did they encode a specific status or magical protection that we can no longer comprehend? The administrative logic of entire civilizations remains locked in these patterns. We have found vast archives of seal impressions in places like the Indus Valley, but we cannot read the script on the seals, and the system that organized their use is a complex bureaucracy we can only glimpse. How do they track shipments, levy taxes, or manage labor with these seals? The evidence is all there, but the operating manual is lost. The craftsmanship presents its own profound mystery. How did artisans, using simple bow drills and abrasives, achieve such impossibly fine detail on stones as hard as hematite? The precision of the carvings, with lines finer than a human hair, suggests skills and perhaps even forgotten tools or techniques that rival modern engraving. Each unbroken seal is a standing invitation to the unknown, a promise from the past that has not yet been broken. These are not dead artifacts, but active puzzles, ensuring that every new discovery in the dust of an ancient city has the power to rewrite everything we thought we knew about the birth of security and trust. The very same principles that secured a pharaoh's tomb are now protecting priceless artifacts in museum vaults. Conservators have developed a modern version of the clay bulla, using special waxes and custom stamps to seal storage cabinets and crates. If someone tries to access a collection without authorization, they must break this seal, leaving behind undeniable evidence of their entry. This simple, physical system provides a layer of security that digital logs alone cannot match, offering immediate, visual proof of a container's integrity, just as it did on the docks of ancient Ugarit. Out in the field, archaeological digs have adopted this ancient logic for their own security. At the end of a day's excavation, teams will seal the entire site with numbered, custom-made tags that loop through gate latches and tent zippers. These modern bulli, often made of durable plastic or metal, must remain unbroken for the site's security to be verified each morning. It is a direct and elegant application of a 4,000-year-old idea, creating a chain of custody for an entire dig site. The influence of these ancient systems is even reaching into the digital realm. Some cybersecurity experts are looking at how the unique, physical imperfections of a seal could inspire new forms of hardware authentication. They are exploring ways to engineer microscopic, unclonable variations into computer chips, creating a physical fingerprint for a device. This would be the digital age's equivalent of the deliberate flaw in a Babylonian cylinder seal, a unique identifier rooted not in software, but in the immutable physics of the object itself. You interact with the legacy of ancient seals every single day. That plastic ring on a medicine bottle that pops when you twist the cap, the foil seal over your yogurt, the shrink wrap on a new electronics box, all of these are direct descendants of the clay bulla. They are all tamper-evident devices designed to provide a clear, visual signal that the contents are safe and have not been interfered with. This enduring principle, born from the need to trust a shipment of grain from a distant land, now secures the food we eat and the medicine we depend on. It turns out that the most robust security solutions are not always the most complex. The ancient world discovered that a system which makes interference obvious and undeniable can be more powerful than the most elaborate hidden lock. In our relentless pursuit of advanced digital encryption and futuristic safeguards, we are repeatedly rediscovering the timeless wisdom pressed into clay, a reminder that the deepest insights into building trust sometimes come from the distant past. A medieval European knight presses his heavy signet ring into a pool of warm, scarlet wax, leaving behind the unique imprint of his family's heraldic beast. Half a world away, a Chinese scholar carefully dips his personal chop, carved from jade or soapstone, into a pot of vibrant red cinnabar paste before stamping it precisely onto a silk scroll. These actions, separated by centuries and continents, were all answering the same fundamental call, the human need to authenticate and secure. While the civilizations of Mesopotamia and Egypt perfected the use of clay, other cultures engineered their own brilliant solutions using the materials and artistic traditions closest to hand, creating a fascinating global tapestry of trust technology. In Europe, the transition from clay to wax was a practical adaptation. Wax was pliable and readily available, and when sealed with a metal matrix or a signet ring, it created a distinctive, colored impression that was difficult to forge. These seals were deeply personal, often bearing coats of arms or portraits, and their use was so legally binding that a monarch's Great Seal was deliberately destroyed upon their death to prevent forgery of posthumous orders. Far to the east, China developed an entirely different aesthetic. Their seals or chops were primarily stamp seals, and the focus was overwhelmingly on the beauty of the carved characters themselves. The resulting impression in red paste was not just a mark of approval, it was an integral part of the artwork, a point of visual balance and ownership on a painting or calligraphy. The paste itself was a carefully crafted substance, often made from cinnabar and castor oil, designed to adhere clearly and resist fading, a direct parallel to the ancient search for the perfect clay consistency. Meanwhile, in the administrative heart of the Ottoman Empire, a different kind of security emblem flourished, the tughra. This was not a stamp in the traditional sense, but an elaborate calligraphic monogram of the Sultan's name and titles, drawn by a specialized artist onto official documents. Its intricate, flowing lines were themselves a form of anti-counterfeiting, a complex design that was nearly impossible to replicate without the skill of a master calligrapher. Comparing these systems reveals a universal truth. Whether the medium was clay, wax, paste, or ink, every culture confronted the same core challenges: how to create a unique identifier, how to make it difficult to copy, and how to ensure its meaning was understood across a wide domain. The solutions they crafted were perfect reflections of their worlds: the heraldic pride of feudal Europe, the scholarly elegance of China, and the bureaucratic grandeur of the Islamic empires. Each system, in its own way, proved that the desire to secure a promise is a thread that connects all of humanity, no matter what materials we have on hand to press into service. A master seal carver did not see a blank cylinder of lapis lazuli as a surface for a stamp, but as a canvas for an epic. Within a space no larger than your fingertip, they orchestrated entire worlds. A single scene might depict a hero grappling with two lions, a worshipper being led before a seated deity, and a row of attendants, all framed by an inscription naming the owner. This compression of narrative was not haphazard. It was a sophisticated art form demanding flawless composition. The carver had to balance the figures, ensuring the scene felt dynamic yet stable, leaving no awkward, empty spaces that a forger could easily exploit. The density of the imagery was itself a security feature, a visual puzzle so intricate that copying it perfectly by hand was a nearly superhuman feat. The aesthetic choices were deeply cultural. Early Egyptian scarab seals favored a formal, hieratic symmetry, their scarab backs and hieroglyphic bases arranged with a balance that reflected the cosmic order of Mot. Centuries later, Greek artisans broke from this tradition, embracing a dynamic naturalism. Their seals showed gods and heroes in active, twisting poses, their muscles straining and drapery flowing, capturing a single, fleeting moment of drama. This was not a random artistic shift. It mirrored the broader movement in Greek sculpture, from rigid archaic forms to the lifelike ideals of the classical period. The seal was a perfect mirror of its culture's artistic soul. Even the most utilitarian seal, used by a tax collector in a provincial town, spoke volumes through its quality. A crude, hastily carved design might mark a low-level functionary, while a beautifully executed seal of the same official type signaled a person of higher standing or a more important administrative post. The beauty of the object was directly proportional to the trust it was meant to command. This fusion of art and security resulted in objects that were far more than functional locks. They were wearable galleries, pocket-sized declarations of identity, and miniature monuments to a civilization's highest artistic and technical achievements. They proved that the most effective security does not have to be ugly. It can be a thing of profound beauty, designed to be admired even as it defies imitation. The echoes of those ancient seals resonate in every secure transaction we make today. We have traced the journey of these clay sentinels from the storerooms of Mesopotamia to the digital frameworks of our modern world, uncovering how they solved the timeless human challenges of trust and verification. These civilizations, separated from us by millennia, engineered systems of profound sophistication using nothing more than carved stone and wet clay. They grasped the core principles that still define security today: the power of a unique identifier, the undeniable evidence of tampering, and the strength of a systematic chain of verification. Every time you break a tamper-evident seal on a medicine bottle, use a digital signature to authorize a payment, or see a hologram shimmer on a banknote, you are interacting with the direct intellectual descendants of the cylinder seal and the clay bulla. These are not merely modern conveniences, they are the latest expressions of an ancient dialogue about how we build trust between strangers and secure our promises across time and space. The next time your phone authenticates your fingerprint, remember the merchant who pressed his personal seal into a contract 4,000 years ago, both of you using the technology of your age to make the same simple declaration: "This is me, and my word is true." If this journey into the origins of security has illuminated connections you had not seen before, I would love to hear what surprised you most in the comments below. For more explorations that bridge the deep past with our living present, be sure to subscribe.